Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. What's the scariest thing you have ever experienced? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. As a little kid, I was roused from sleep in the middle of the night due to the sensation of sliding toward the window. It was summertime and the head of my bed was up against the open window. I screamed as I got closer, and it instantly stopped. I woke the whole damn house up. My dad checked outside the house the next day and found ladder prints in the grass. My bedroom was on the second floor. I worked as a body removal technician, and I transported a decedent from their residence to the funeral home. Keep in mind that this was at 3 in the morning since we were on call. I get to the funeral home and go in through the rear door to turn all the lights on in the room where we drop off the bodies. During the time that I was in that room, I had to use the restroom, so I went into the main area of the funeral home. I left the room I was in and went into the hallway. I couldn't find a light switch anywhere, so it was pitch black. I used the flashlight on my phone and walk around trying to find the restroom. As I'm walking, I come up to the restroom. There's an open door leading into a giant room right across from the restroom. As I'm walking by that open door, I get this incredibly unnerving feeling, and the hair on the back of my neck stands up. It felt like I wasn't the only one there, and it felt like I was being watched from every single direction. I heard something move in that room, and I looked through the doorway, but there wasn't a single person in there. As soon as I did that, I started hearing whispers coming from that room, and given the fact that I confirmed there was no one in there, I immediately turned around and booked it out of there. The entire time I was heading back toward the door I came from, I didn't dare look behind me because it felt like something was following me, and I wasn't about to be the first one to die in this horror movie of a scene. That was probably one of the creepier experiences I've had. There is that mentally challenged girl in a nursery home in my neighborhood who is obviously obsessed with Jesus. She always wears a white dress and walks from house to house to spread the word of the Lord on her bare feet. Before I knew about her, me and my cousin were at his home watching horror movies since it was late, dark, and rainy outside. You can guess what happened. All of a sudden, she stood outside the window with her wet white dress, pushing her face against the window, yelling, "Jesus loves you all." 10 out of 10 would say it was the scariest moment of my life. I was walking home late at night from a friend's house. It was only a 7-block walk, but I had to walk past an abandoned factory building and then a dead-end road that just cuts off at the edge of the woods. No one was out or about that I could see. It was like 3 a.m. I had just gotten to the old factory when I heard random whistling somewhere up ahead. It was definitely human whistling, but it had no real melody or pattern. It was just a lot of random notes. As I got further past the factory, the whistling sounded closer. I was near the dead-end road at this point. When I looked around the corner of that dead-end road, I saw this person standing at the end almost in the woods. They were crouching, then standing up, then bobbing around, then rocking back and forth. There was a white light coming from the middle of their forehead, too. I assumed it was someone with a headlamp out looking for a lost dog or something. I couldn't really see any detail other than the light on their head, just a black human shape. Either way, I edged a little closer and started to ask if they needed any help. The movements and whistles stopped. They looked like they turned around toward me, but somehow I still couldn't see any detail on them, like I couldn't even discern a face, clothing, or skin color, and my immediate instinct was to back away slowly, so I did. When I took my first few steps backwards, they took a few toward me, wordlessly. We faced each other in silence for a few seconds before I whirled around to run the rest of the way to the next block so I could get back under some streetlights. While I ran, I heard footsteps jogging up behind me. I made it to the next block and ran under the lights. When I turned to look behind me, there was no one there. The jogging sounds had stopped. The figure I'd been running from was nowhere to be seen. I was at the library in college one day in a cubicle reading a book. These two older gentlemen came up behind me. One put his hand on my shoulder and said, And this is my name. He works at my job at an office supply store. I went white as a sheet. I'd never seen these people before. He just chuckled. I was at your work the other day. I read your name tag. Sorry I scared you. It's kind of funny, I guess. Some dude was following me home. I'm also a male. Till I reached the gate of the apartment compound, which requires a key card. Got in, closed the gate immediately to lock it, and I could see the dude just standing there staring at me for a few more seconds, then walked off. I reported this to the local police, and they said, yeah, they've been noticing someone, and told me not to walk around late after dark. I've never seen him again since then, and there has been no news from the police either. A couple of years ago, my brother, 6 or 7 at the time, woke me up crying, saying he saw something at his window. I calmed him down a bit, and he explained that someone wearing a red demon mask was at his window watching him. I was 11 to 12 and was very creeped out by this. I went to his room and nothing was there. He went to sleep, and I stayed up for the rest of the night. His rooms were on the 2nd floor, so I don't know what he saw, but he acted so panicked, and I fully believed he saw something that night. Maybe it was a nightmare, or night terror, or something, but it still creeps me out to think about it. My oldest brother died at age 39 in 2016, and I had flown into town to stay with the family as we prepared for his celebration of life. I was sleeping in my aunt's basement, which is connected to her laundry room, and also has some storage and a small wine room. At about midnight, getting ready to fall asleep, my then fiancé and I were startled by a loud pop and crash. We went into the wine room, and there was a bottle of red wine that had popped and was emptying onto the floor. We went and grabbed my aunt and brought her down to show her, and upon closer inspection, we realized that there were trails of wine dripping down the sides of the bottle to its bottom. The creepiest thing about this, though, was that the bottle was stored with the cork end at a downward angle toward the floor, so there's no earthly reason the wine would be able to defy gravity like that, and the trails of wine were completely dry. The very next day, I placed a newly purchased single lily in a small vase on the kitchen counter, totally healthy and thriving. Immediately after putting it in the vase, I stepped out of the kitchen, spent literally 5 seconds grabbing something from the adjacent dining room, and when I got back into the kitchen, every single petal of the flower was on the floor, only the stem was left in the vase. When my other brother passed away in 2014 at the age of 35, 2 years prior, I was in that same basement actually sleeping this time. A set of golf clubs that had been there for months in the corner of the room, and nobody had gone anywhere near them, came crashing down in the middle of the night. I didn't even look to see what it was. I shot off that damn couch and sprinted up the stairs like effing Usain Bolt. Needless to say, I really don't like sleeping in her basement. Vacationing on a tropical island, it's after midnight, and my wife and I are dozing off to sleep. I get startled awake by my wife whispering, "Someone's trying to get in." The front door to our cabin had a big window next to it, and sure enough, through the shades, I could see the silhouette of a man fumbling with our doorknob. My heart has probably never beat so hard. We lay there silently watching him, and he eventually left. I assume it was just some lost drunk guy, but at the time, he was definitely there to murder us. I would probably think it was just another guest at the hotel being drunk, too. I could see that definitely happening, but you never know. Maybe a vacation murderer. I was leaving Walmart, and this very attractive man in a suit approached me and asked to hang out, and I said no. He offered to go to a public park to ease my reluctance, and I said no, so he started walking away, then turned around and came back and said, "What if I paid you?" And I said, no, that sounds a lot like prostitution. He kind of fumbled with his words and said, "Yeah, it does." Then I got in my car and left. What was his ulterior motive? This is not my story, but that of my father. When I believe he was an undergrad, he got a ride from a friend to a house party. The friend got really drunk, so my dad drove the guy home. He was unfamiliar with the car, so he was doing a pretty bad job driving it. He was going pretty fast when he came up to a four-way intersection, which had 2 stop signs, but not for his lane. Anyway, he heard his father's voice tell him, "Look out." His father passed away when he was a kid, so he obviously freaked out and decided to do a rolling stop at the intersection and look both ways, even though he didn't have a stop sign. Well, the car without its headlights on barreled through the stop sign just at about the same time as he reached the intersection. He felt like he narrowly avoided death that night, while the only other passenger, his buddy, was passed out in the passenger seat. I went to take an Uber from my girlfriend's house in New York at 3 a.m. Ubers weren't working for some reason, so I called Lyft. First mistake. I'm waiting outside and I get this weird bad feeling as a car drives by with lights on all over the area, but it's not my ride. After a few minutes, it turns out that car was my ride as the Lyft pulled up to me. The guy says my name and I get in. The car is beat up on the inside and the man is middle-aged with a leather jacket on, and he's talking very slowly and almost methodically. Creepy. And we are in New York, and we talk fast, not slow. I'm a grown man, mind you. I never felt this feeling, but only this time. I felt like this man was seriously bad. I turned on my confidence, though, and didn't show any fear at all. I acted extra confident. Yeah, man, what's up? How's it going? Ah, cool, yeah? Because for some reason I felt like that was a shield. As we're driving, we get on the subject of cars, and man, it feels like these guys are talking even slower. Or is it just me? I asked him what his favorite color for a car is, and he said, I liked red. So I said, okay, what kind? Like a nice cherry red? And I kid you not, he said word for word. I always liked something like a blood red. And inside I'm like, there's no way he just said that. What the? But on the outside I said, oh, okay, yeah. I guess like a dark red then? And he goes, yeah, you know, like when you puncture a vein. And I was about to shit myself, ready to call 911, but I held off. He ended up dropping me off at home, but man, I don't care if he dropped me off. That guy has done some horrible things and spared me. F that guy. 2 winters ago, I was watching the northern lights with my dog. It was about minus 25 degrees Celsius, maybe minus 30, at the coldest. I was sitting on a snow-covered table, and eventually the cold got through to me. By this point, I was out there for an hour and a half, and while the lights are pretty and I enjoy the quiet, once you watch them for 30 minutes, it's good enough. So anyway, I go over to the door and whistle to call my dog in. She still wanted to play in the snow, so she was taking her time. Instead of hearing her trot toward me in the snow, I heard something large moving quite quickly behind my fence, heading toward my driveway. I could hear the hardened snow cracking beneath its feet. It was the distinct sound of compact snow giving way. I'm spooked by this point, so I call my dog once again, and she comes running in. I checked the next morning to see if there were any hoof prints, because it sounded moose-sized, but no moose tracks were there. There were coyote tracks, deer tracks, my tracks, the normal, just nothing large enough to fit the sound. I now fully believe in the superstition about whistling at night. Whatever was rapidly approaching is not something I wish to encounter again in the cold and dark. If my whistling spooked it, I don't want to do that again. If my whistling attracts it, I want to stay the hell away from me. My sister and I were just kids, maybe 5 and 7. We shared a bedroom, and one night we heard scratching on the window. We freaked out and told our dad. He said, don't worry, it's just tree branches. We actually believed him and felt better. I went back to sleep with no issues. In the morning, I realized there were no trees out that window. We were on the 3rd floor. I guess it could have been a branch hanging from the gutters, but yeah, there was nothing visible when I looked. When I turned 18, I moved into a tiny little bachelor-style apartment. This guy had turned a house into 5 apartments. The other tenants were kind of weird, but nice enough. This one older woman took a liking to me. She started popping by my apartment and asking me for rides and stuff, but I didn't mind. Anyways, the apartment was in a pretty effed area, but I was 18 and it was cheap, so I didn't really care. Until people started turning my doorknob in the middle of the night. I just kept my door locked and thought that was the end of it. The older lady ended up asking me if people were trying to get in at night, and I told her yes. She just stared at me for a minute with a blank stare and then left. I'd assumed she was a little slow or something from the beginning, so I wasn't that weirded out. A couple of weeks later, I stayed over at my brother's girlfriend's house for the night, and when I got home, My retainer went missing. I was wearing it every night religiously at this point, and I left it on the same shelf in my bathroom every day when I wasn't wearing it. I started panicking because it would cost me like $500 to replace it, and I turned my bathroom upside down looking for it. Days went by, and it was still gone. My mom ended up calling me a week or so later, and I missed the call. Then she started blowing up my phone with calls and texts, asking if I was okay. I called her back, asking why she was panicking, and she said because my voicemail changed to a woman saying, "She's gone. She's not answering the phone." I got pretty creeped out and went to change my voicemail, but my recorded message was still the same on my phone. I was pretty freaked out at this point, so I called my mom back and told her I was going to buy a little camera to put in my apartment so I'd feel safer. When I got back from buying the camera, my retainer was in the sink, in its case, not on the shelf or by the sink, but in the sink. The woman stopped coming by my apartment. The doorknob stopped being turned on in the middle of the night, and I moved out a couple of months later once I got a better job and could afford something nicer. I still have no idea what was happening or what someone would even gain from taking my retainer and returning it. I'm assuming the weird old lady next door was messing with me or breaking in, but I can't imagine she would be tech savvy enough to hack a voicemail. We were driving down to my sister's wedding. My dad and I are in one car, and mom and another sister are in the other, a mile or two behind. We were on the Pacific Coast Highway in a fairly remote area. Dad and I stopped where we are supposed to reconnect with mom and wait. They had been a mile or two behind us, but it took them far too long to arrive. They finally pulled in, stopped, and just sat in the car, blankly looking at us. As we got closer, we could see they had very odd expressions on their faces. When Dad asked them what delayed them, they got kind of excited and said they saw these strange lights in the sky. They seemed confused when asked to describe them, and Sis said the lights came over the car. They were visibly shaken and confused. They couldn't tell us what delayed them, and they seemed to be in shock or something. They were just behind us, 45 minutes late, and there was no explanation. They could never account for that time they lost and just got weird AF when trying to talk about it. To this day, if I ask about it, they both get that same odd expression, and again, the odd confusion and almost stammering. This is now 30 years later, and it still makes the hair stand up on my neck. We have no idea what happened to them, nor do they. I was 14 years old, lying on my stomach on the floor in my bedroom. I would lock my door to keep my young nephews from walking into my room without warning. As I'm reading, I hear a sound from behind me. It sounded like someone was breathing. There was a window behind me, so I figured someone was right outside or something, so I ignored it. As I flipped through the pages of my magazine, the sound began to grow closer and louder. It crept up closer to the back of my neck, making my hair stand up, and triggering the weird tickling feeling that sounds that are too close to my ears cause. At this point, I was so afraid that I couldn't have turned around, even if I'd wanted to. This is the only time I've ever been scared frozen. I was so frightened that I couldn't even scream or anything. The breathing was so close to my ear that I could feel it. I was eventually able to muster up a scream and start calling for my mom. I couldn't form words, I just screamed as loud as I could. My mom got to the door pretty fast, but my door was locked. She somehow managed to get the door open, and without even asking me what was wrong, she threw a blanket over me, picked me up, and ran out of the room. She carried me to the living room, warning my little nephews not to go in there. I told her what happened. She didn't say much about it after that, but I wasn't allowed back into my room for a couple days. I have no idea what it was, or if my mom even knows either. That frozen in fear feeling was the most uncomfortable sensation. Back when I worked at McDonald's, I must have been 19 at the time. After closing, a coworker, female, and I, male, jumped out of the drive-thru window to collect the dropped change from the day, only for our manager to unknowingly lock us out. As we ran around the front, used the door, A guy who was inside earlier stopped us and asked my coworker for her phone number. She tells him she already has a boyfriend, and then the guy says, "I can change that." The guy was slurring his speech the entire time, so he was either drunk, high, or both. I was so creeped out by him that I started pushing my coworker inside to get away from him. Fortunately, we never saw him again. When I was a kid, especially before the age of 10, I would sometimes get night terrors, usually because I was dehydrated from being outside all day. 99% of the night terrors I had, I couldn't remember what happened or what I was thinking. One time, for example, I slept over at a friend's house and had a night terror. I asked my friend's mom if she was going to kill me. I didn't even remember talking to her that night. But there's one night terror that I do remember very vividly, and that even gave me hallucinations. I was 7 at the time, and I woke up in the middle of the night from very vivid dreams, perhaps the only time I can remember experiencing Inception. I try to open my eyes, and then I realize I can't. I can't move my legs or my arms, nothing. I had full-on sleep paralysis, and this is where the creepy experience starts. I felt something hop on my bed and start jumping up and down, and it even started laughing like a clown. I didn't open my eyes or anything. I just laid there terrified. It eventually stops, and I can move again. I get out of bed and head to my parents' room, which is upstairs. As I'm walking up the stairs, I notice my sister's Raggedy Ann doll on the floor. I see this doll get on 2 legs and start dancing in front of me for about 5 seconds, moving its arms like a worm and moving its hips side to side. I can't move again, can't breathe, and I'm just staring, hoping it stops. As soon as it stopped, I had feeling in my body again and ran to my parents' door. The only problem was they had it locked that night. I had just slept on the floor at their door that night.